All right, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bashem Yahushua, Bashem Makakwadash, double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone that rule well and teach well. All right, I'm the brother Arak from GMS Dallas, and I'm coming through with another quick hit. All right, Bible dictionary lesson, and in this lesson, I'm going to go into Amalek. All right, but more specifically, I'm going to go into the Amalekites. All right, because when you look it up, you'll see Amalek, but on the entry right underneath, typically you'll see the Amalekites. All right, and the inspiration of this lesson is, just the continuation of the series, but also from camp last night. Okay, the priest Osman Waf from down here in GMS Dallas. All right, had brought up Deuteronomy 20, the 25th chapter. All right, about the last three verses of the chapter. Three verses of the chapter, excuse me. And we're going to start there, right? Because the scriptures talk about, okay, never trust in thine enemy. Okay, and in order to not trust your enemy, you got to know who your enemy is. Okay, you got to know, all right, who's the adversary. You know what I'm saying? Who is, the spiritual demon Satan, working through on the planet Earth. All right, and when you ask that question, and when you search the scriptures, okay, the immediate answer, all right, is Esau, Edom. Okay, but within the nation of Esau, all right, you have, sub families, so to speak. You have, houses, so to speak, right? The same way you have the nation of Israel as a whole, but you have the house of David, okay? And you have Esau, all right, but you also have the descendants of Esau, in which one of them is Amalek, all right, and the Amalekites, all right, who we believe to be the small hats, all right. So I'm going to mention that, first and foremost, but I'm not going to go too crazy because I don't want this video to get striked. You know what I'm saying? So without further ado, let's go here in Deuteronomy chapter 25 and verse 17. It says, remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way. All right, we'll start there, okay, because the scriptures talk about, all right, remembering your history, okay, seeking the old paths. All right, scriptures also talk about how the things aforetime are written for our learning. Okay, so when you read scriptures like this, you're not just supposed to just gloss over it. You should be inquiring. All right, who are these people? What is their role in prophecy? All right, and if you're paying attention to all the spotlight, the shameful spewing that Esau and Amalek are getting, all right, everybody is starting to realize that they are that long disease that the scriptures speak about. And this is in their reputation, their legacy, the energy that they come in is well documented in the scriptures, as we're about to read. All right. And this is one example, but this is one of the first, events that really highlights how much of a, degenerate, Amalek is. But this is Deuteronomy 25 and 17. It says, remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way, when ye were come forth out of Egypt. Okay, now let's get this word Amalek. All right, in the Hebrew. All right, this word Amalek, let me share my screen, is Imalekwa. All right, and when you go to the outline of biblical usage, it translates it into dweller in the valley. All right, dweller in the valley. Okay, and a valley is basically, a low land. All right, it's like the crevice in between two mountains. You know what I'm saying? It says, son of Eliphaz by his concubine Timnah, grandson of Esau and progenitor of a tribe in southern Canaan. Okay, it says Esau, also his posterity. All right, posterity just means descendants, okay, or children. All right, so or Amalek, excuse me. All right, they're translating into dweller in the valley. Okay, and let me get a preset real quick. All right, because right now, really, you can liken America unto a valley. Right, you can liken America unto that valley of the shadow of death that the scriptures speak about in Psalms 23. Let's get that. This is Psalms chapter 23 and verse 4. It says, yea, Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. All right. So right now, we're in the valley. We're in the valley of the shadow of death. We're in a low land. Okay. We're in a place that's basically um, void of, life. It's void of any morality. All right. It's void of any righteousness. All right. Everybody is basically dead, you know? And the reason everybody's dead is because everybody is underneath really the vibration of Esau. All right. Scriptures talk about how Esau is as death, So that's why you have people walking around, all right, miserable as all hell, all right, negative, all right, and they're basically zombies, man. They're vampires. They're just energy zapping, people. They're leeches. All right. And like it says in Sirach 10, as the ruler is, so are the people, roughly paraphrasing. So we're living in a valley right now. We're living in Amalek's paradise, Esau's paradise, you know. So let's go back, all right, to this word. That's pretty much all I want on the word. Let's go back to Deuteronomy 25. And then we're going to start reading a couple of these entries in the Bible dictionary. This is Deuteronomy chapter 25 and verse 17. It says, "Remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way, when ye were come forth out of Egypt, how he met thee by the way, and smote the hindmost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, when thou wast faint and weary, and he feared not Yahweh Shem Shah." All right, so when we were coming out of Egypt, making that, trek, that pilgrimage from Egypt to the Holy Land, Amalek took it upon himself to basically attack the vulnerable of our people, right? Because when you consider the hindmost, that's the people in the back of the pack, which is what, elderly, children, women. All right. Okay, so that's some insight into the character of these people, and those are the same people that are ruling today. That's the same individuals that, you got people that call them the elite, call them the shadow government, the Illuminati, various names. Really, it's going into Amalek, man. All right, you don't believe me? Just look at the way that these corporations, you got something called corporate capitalism. Okay, let's look that up real quick. Let's look up corporate capitalism. Okay, because the so-called, way of the West, the so-called American dream, all right, the image of the beast, this way of life that people love so much, all right, well, guess what? Corporations are behind it, and they're the ones basically taking advantage of you, violating, the feeble, okay, taking advantage of people who can't defend themselves. This whole system is built upon that, built upon scamming your ass. All right, let's get a quick definition. Let's get back to it. This is the definition of corporate. Let me type this in. Or excuse me, the definition I'm looking for is predatory capitalism. Excuse me. All right, this is the definition of predatory capitalism. It says predatory capitalism is an economic system prioritizing relentless profit maximization over social welfare and environmental sustainability and ethical standards. It says it involves aggressive, often exploitive tactics. Okay, aggressive, exploitive tactics. All right. Let me scroll down. Let me see if there's any more on this. It says exploitive practices. All right. Predatory. Yep. So let's go back. That's pretty much all I wanted on that. All right. But there's a reason why. All right. You got in these times today, all right, a lot of these digital systems, right? They prey upon, the weak. They prey upon the elderly. They prey upon children. All right. A lot of this technology that we're seeing was targeted towards manipulating the minds of children. A lot of this digital way of life, the people that suffer the most from it are the elderly. They don't know how to work none of this shit. They're the ones getting scammed. They're the ones, you got Jake on the internet bragging about scamming niggas, man. They're scamming the elderly. But guess what? This is a system that was created by Esau, right? By Amalek. So those are just examples, as to how rulership, whoever's in charge, that's going to trickle down upon everyone, you know? So let's go back. This is Deuteronomy chapter 25 and verse 19. It says, "Therefore it shall be, when the Lord thy God have given thee rest from all thine enemies round about, in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance to possess it, that thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, thou shalt not forget it." Okay, so ultimately Amalek is going to be removed. All right, he's going to be removed from the planet Earth. Okay, thus saith the Lord. All right, so let's read this first entry. All right, this is from the NIV Compact Dictionary. It says, Amalekites, an ancient and nomadic marauding people dwelling mainly in the Negev from the times of Abraham to Hezekiah. All right, and the word nomadic means basically somebody who goes from place to place. All right, basically a vagabond. Right, let's get that. All right, because the scriptures liken Cain unto a vagabond when you read the book of Genesis, but we know that Esau is the continuation of Cain through the spirit. He is the seed of the serpent. Let's get this vagabond. Let's get this in the book of Genesis, right? Because it said a nomadic and marauding people. All right, and we're going to get the definition of marauding as well. Genesis chapter 4 and verse 12. All right. And this is the Lord speaking unto Cain. It says, verse 12, "When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth." All right, now let's get this word vagabond. Nawad. And it says to shake, to waver, to wander. All right, to wander. That's what a nomad is. A nomad is someone who wanders from place to place. All right, now let's get this word marauding. All right, it says marauding describes people or animals roaming around in search of victims, plunder, or things to steal, often characterized by aggressive, violent raiding and ravaging. Okay, and that's basically what the small hats, right? Net and not a Jew, right? And Trump. That's what's going on right now today. All right, roaming all over the planet Earth, stealing every goddamn thing. All right, that's what's happening right now. All right, so let's go back to this definition. All right, it says an ancient and nomadic marauding people dwelling mainly in the Negev from the times of Abraham to Hezekiah, 2000 to 700 BC. It says the first mention of them is among those conquered by Kedorlaomer in the days of Abraham, Genesis 14 and 7. It says Moses felt their fury in the unprovoked attack on Israelites at Rephidim, for which God decreed continual war. All right, and then it lists, numerous precepts. Numbers 14, Judges 3 and 13, 6 and 3, 6 and 33, 1 Samuel 12 and 15, 1 Samuel 27 and 8, 1 Samuel 30 and 18, 2 Samuel 1 and 8. I'm not going to pull these, right? But these are scriptures that you can go into. It says an ultimate obliteration. Exodus 17 and 8. All right, let's get Exodus 17 and 8. Okay, this is Exodus chapter 17 and verse 8. It says, all right, and then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said unto Joshua, choose us out men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses and Aaron and Hur went unto the top of the hill. And let me jump down to verse 14, right? Because we go on to get the victory, okay? Because Aaron, all right, basically helped Moses hold up his hand, right? But let me jump down to verse 14. It says, and the Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in the book and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Okay, so that's reiterated when you read Deuteronomy 25. All right, you can also link that up with Obadiah, the first chapter. Okay, it says, read this last paragraph. It says, in character, they were warlike and usually associated with Canaanites or Moabites. It says, Saul failed to destroy them, but David reduced them to inactivity, that the Simeonites at Mount Seir killed the remaining Amalekites who had escaped. 1 Chronicles 14 and 43, 144. Look at that. All right, because they elect the 144,000, which is the tabernacle of David, the house of David rebuilt. All right, we're gonna do that. The elect are gonna do that again. All right, they're gonna blot out the remembrance from Esau and Amalek from the planet Earth. That's gonna happen again. The same, the scriptures talk about that. Ecclesiastes 1 and 9. The thing that has been is that which shall be. There's no new thing under the sun. All right. And when you go into the reign of King Saul, one of King Saul's primary downfalls was not completely destroying Amalek, and if I'm not mistaken, taking the spoils, when he wasn't supposed to. Samuel rebuked him for that. All right. And you have Israelites today that refuse to, all right, get on Esau. You got Israelites talking about Esau can be saved. All right, showing you that even in this time today, you got the house of Saul and you got the house of David. You got those who are really doing the will of the Lord and bought in, and those who want to do their own thing. All right, but that's neither here nor there. Let's get back into these definitions. All right, let's go to the next one. This is the New Compact Bible. All right, let me share my screen. Let's zoom in. The New Compact Bible. Same thing. It says an ancient and nomadic marauding people dwelling mainly in the Negev from the times of Abraham to Hezekiah. All right. It says they are frequently mentioned in the history of Israel. All right. Let's see if there's anything else. Okay. There's nothing really there. Yep. So that's pretty much the point. All right. Just wanted to go into that definition real quick. All right. I'm gonna finish out with this though. All right, because the entry said a warlike people. All right, a warlike people. All right, and when you read other scriptures such as Psalms 140, for example, or the red horse, right? You got the red horse in the book of Revelation 6. All right, which is talking about Esau. All right, we can see right now with everything that's going on in the news who this marauding and warlike people is, who these people are. All right, the scriptures also liken him to the bloody man. This is Psalms 140. All right, or the violent man, excuse me. Psalms 140 and 1, it says, deliver me, O Lord, from the evil man. Preserve me from the violent man, which imagine mischiefs in their heart, and continually are they gathered together for war. All right. And that's what we see right now. All right. We see Esau, all right, waging another war, all right, on another part of the planet Earth, taking things, taking resources, taking lives that don't belong to him. Okay. And for what reason? All right. No other reason than his own gain, his own greedy, desires. All right. So I'll close it on that. All right. Lord's willing, this lesson was edifying. With that, I want to say shalom.